very intimate gathering, and we thank you all for being here. Welcome to the first ever Blue Table Talk. It was a team summit earlier today, and it continues into tomorrow. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Darren Herbert. I'm an actor, husband, father, son, brother, and I accompany this lady in many capacities in life. So I'm going to do an introduction for her. But I just want to once again thank you all for being with us. It's a more intimate setting. And for the people online as well, we are aware that you are there, so welcome. Thank you for joining us. And let me jump right into it, because I'm sure she's anxious to get started. So the speaker this evening is Ms. Joanne Darrell Herbert, my spouse. I'm going to read the intro so I don't jack up her qualifications. Joanne is a registered psychotherapist with a master's degree in counseling psychology from the University of British Columbia. I was there at the walk. She is registered with the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario and the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association. Joanne, a queer Bermudian Canadian, has been working with teens, parents, teachers, and administrators for over 20 years. In her private practice, Joanne especially enjoys helping couples to build stronger relationships and supporting families as they navigate inevitable growing pains. So will you join me in giving a warm welcome to our speaker, Ms. Joanne Darrell Herbert.
Good evening. I'm not going to try and climb up the stage today. So I'm going 40. When you're going north of 40, you want to try things like that. But welcome. Thank you again for being here. I am here to tell you, this parenting gig ain't no joke, is it? Ain't no joke. So what we're going to start with is I want you to lower your eyes or close your eyes, whatever feels better for you, whatever feels more comfortable. And I invite you to slow down. If you fall asleep, I will not wake you, okay? Unless you're snoring loudly and disturbing others. Seriously though, if you're asleep here, your body needs rest. And I want you to take it seriously. Like your trans. Your car, your bike, your ankle express, whatever it is, you need to give it fuel. And regular maintenance is important for it to operate. So think about your life right now. How often are you experiencing joy? And this is real joy, not addictions, but real joy and happiness. So just sit in that for a moment. Do we even know what happiness feels like in the body? Now, those of us who have minds racing, thinking about your to-do lists, thinking, really, Joanne, I just found out this is online. I could be home in my pajamas watching you. I promise the hour will not be as woo-woo as it is right now. But we often don't get an opportunity to slow down and reflect, okay? But I want you to think about how much of your joy is connected to work. I see some faces like, it ain't there. How much of your joy is connected to your friends, your lovers, your family, your passions, or your community? Now, some of us may have wandering minds, and that is okay. Thinking about your to-do list, that's okay. Just bring your mind back when you catch yourself drifting. So gently shift your thoughts back to the early days of becoming a parent. Your hopes for yourself and for your families, for the world. How you might have gone from changing diapers to someday, hopefully, having your child change their own drawers somewhat regularly. And if not, then how can you meet your child where they are at instead of where you want them to be? So think about your purpose in parenting now. Philosophically, where do you stand? Is parenting a dreadful sacrifice and a duty? A decision to work hard and grind to give our children a better chance than us, like many of our parents before us? Are we being practical and dutiful? All we do is for our children. Perhaps we are only surviving until they can survive on their own. And some of us may be saying the children are here and we must get on with it. Are we operating by the old adage of, do as I say, not as I do? Do you believe that material things and resources equal happiness? Over the past 23 years, I've worked with families who have more money than they know what to do with, and families who don't know where their next meal is coming from. And the disconnection from each other feels the same. It feels lonely, it feels disheartening, like you have a hole in your chest. Everyone has different resources, and one of your jobs is to figure out what resources you do have and use them. And this is a strengths-based approach. If you're not having any fun at all parenting, I do not envy you. If you want to improve at work, there's lots of courses you can take, often a clear trajectory for upward mobility. But parenting? Whew. There are general parenting courses, but none are specifically geared toward your style and your child. Can parenting be a wonderful sacrifice? A decision to experience joy and passion and curiosity about this not quite fully developed young person? Well, I'm trying. My own stuff gets in the way. My husband's own stuff gets in the way. We get it wrong, sometimes we get it right, but parenting requires time, and it needs to be a priority. And tonight I ask you to really give yourself some space and some grace as you navigate this without a manual. There is no parenting manual. And congratulations on being here tonight. So you can open your eyes. Thank you for that. What was that like to just take a few moments and pause and to reflect about your own kind of parenting? Or to be awake with your eyes closed? Say again? It was refreshing. We don't often have an opportunity to do that, right? To really just go inside and think about it. A lot of us are on automatic. I want you to take home 3 things today, not including that I have no idea about technology. I'm going to sort out this computer in a minute. But I want you to think about what your passions are, for one. And I noticed that in female-identified bodies, we often don't have time for our passions, if we even know what they are, right? Male-identified bodies somehow seem to not only continue with their passions, this is a generalization, but they seem to increase their passions in many cases. And how is this so in parenting? So I really want you to think back before the children. What was I interested in? What were my passions before this? Because I really want you to role model this for your children, right? That if you have decided that life and parenting is not meant to be just a grind, then you have to figure it out and role model it as much as you can. And I'm not talking about taking a spa vacation, right? I'm talking about the fact that we had a child with diarrhea and vomiting for a whole week. And then when we sat down and played a game of Spot It together on the floor together as a family and nobody was vomiting, that was pure joy in that moment for me, right? And just trying to sit in that little bit of happiness. Does that make sense? Yeah. I really want you to consider, so that's number one, find your passion, right? Figure out what it is, and then I want you to see if you can role model that. And it's scary, I have to tell you. It's scary for me too. I only recently remembered that I enjoy ikebana. Anybody know what ikebana is? It's the art of Japanese floral arranging. So when we lived in Japan, I took it up, and then I forgot. And now I'm like, oh. And it's really something that I enjoy doing. So I'm gonna try that again when we get back. So find your passion, try to role model it, okay? Second one is, I want you to really consider getting curious about your children. Really investing in the questions and the way in which we interact with them. So we want to ask questions that are going to create intimacy and connection, right? So for example, did anybody have a child here today who came to the summit? Nobody had a child that came to the summit today. Okay, well then. So an intimacy or kind of connecting question for your child may be, what made you laugh at school today? Underneath that, right? Okay, my mind automatically goes to, well, were you behaving at school, right? Were you paying attention when you were laughing, right? Because on top, like forward facing, I want to ask these questions that are, connecting and intimacy building. But my anxiety as a parent that's underneath is really like, I need to know that you're behaving when you're out of my sight. You know what I mean? So it's really becoming aware of that and trying to let go of the anxiety of not being with them or worrying about them. Because how many of us worry about our children? We're worried pretty much, right? So that's something to consider. That's the second part, is about curiosity. A lot of kids will say, my parents aren't interested in me. They'll say, if you're trying to ask them a question, it's because we have an ulterior motive, which is true, but you gotta get to be better actors. I'm telling you. So in terms of like, what made you laugh today at school? Or did anything make you happy today at school? Or anything make you sad at school today? Or what are you looking forward to this year, And I think the other thing is about us really, if you really want to connect with your children, is to, let them know that, right? Sometimes they know that we're just on the grind, we're just going, and we're doing this for you. And even though we're not directly hearing it, or they're not directly hearing it from us that, necessarily we're doing this for you, they pick up on the anxiety. They pick up on, I'm not really getting attention, and they're gravitating towards their peers at this point, right? The third thing that I want you to consider, because these curious questions, right? So let's say you're like, yes, Joanne, I could ask all the questions I want. I'm gonna get a brick wall, right? Or I'm gonna get yes, no, because maybe they don't trust us right now, right? Because they know we're gonna either tell us, our siblings, about our child's business, which they hate, right? Or our friends. Or we are going to turn around and judge them. So we get this brick wall, right? So I encourage you to practice receiving what you don't want to receive. It's not gonna be immediate gratification. We're working on it, right? It's like you're planting a seed. You're saying, I don't care what you do. I don't care what you say. I'm gonna love you unconditionally. I don't have to agree with everything you say or do. But one thing remains the same. I'm gonna be here as much as I can for you, right? Even if you feel like being, I can't say that word because we're live, but they need to know that even when they look like we are not there, that we are actually there, right? Now you say, Joanne, how do we do this? How do we do this? Because let me tell you, when we get triggered, we go right back to whatever's kind of like ingrained in us. And then, do you hear your own parents talking? You're like, Whose voice is that? That's my, oh my gosh, that's my inner voice, right? So what I want you to consider about this is, A, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Let me fix this thing. Hold on, because I forgot. I put this whole thing together. You're supposed to be looking at it. All right. Now, where's my little clicker? Okay. Let's try this. Oh, right, okay. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. This is me when I was at Work Academy, 14 years old-ish. It was a rough time, I'm telling you. What I want you to do, actually, we're going to move on to this one, is how do you ground yourself in the middle of stress? Then, listen, you haven't even made dinner yet, right? You get home, you're already stressed from work, all you hear is noise, right? It's really a lot to manage. I'm just gonna tell you, I got some earplugs that are like very helpful. They block out a lot of noise, but they allow you to focus. Game changer for parenting for me, just what I say. But in terms of that, first of all, you need to be, as much as you can, which we know is most times impossible, but again, remember, many male-identified bodies manage to stay hydrated. They manage to stay fed, well rested as well, right? So I think we also want to use that as much as we can as a kind of model, right? Because if you're hungry, I know if I'm hungry, you don't want to be around me. You really don't. And I imagine it's the same for a lot of us, right? If you're hungry or you're stressed and all of these things, and our kids don't really necessarily know. And here's the thing, we're gonna make mistakes because that's the nature of it, right? But there are certain things that we can say and do in order to be more connected to them. How many of you have considered or really genuinely apologized to your kids when you're wrong? Something that we can work on, right? And the thing is, when is the latest time you can apologize to someone for something? Never, right? There's never an expiration date on an apology. So if you feel like, oh, my child probably forgot about it, I don't need to say I'm sorry, and you haven't done it, you can make amends like that. You can still do that, right? And just show them, yeah, you know what? I got this wrong. It happens. And you're modeling for them and also for all of the relationships too, right? It's like a web. Okay, so when I told you about staying grounded in the face of challenges, what I want you to do is consider that we are intellectually conditioned to respond in a certain way depending on what we value, right? And what we've been trained to do. You know, maybe you're under manners, right? And then we also have what our body tells us, right? Which can be like different than our heads. Have you ever been walking like down a street and you're the only one on the street and the hair on the back of your neck kind of stands up because you feel like somebody might be behind you, right? That's your body giving you a message. It's just information, right? But when you pay attention to that message and you turn around and you look, one of the ways that we cope with that, with the body response, is intellectually we say, oh, you know what? This is too overwhelming, so nobody's there, I'm fine, everything's fine. You know, I'm just gonna go into this more well-lit area or whatever it is, right? But that's the body's response, and the head can be doing something different, right? So this is also what's happening when you're in confrontation with your teen, right? And intellectually your head is saying, this child should not be disrespecting me like this. How are they using this tone? And we're focused on the tone, right? As opposed to underneath, what are they communicating, right? And sometimes if our value is we equate respect with tone, like that they have to be compliant or they have to use a certain kind of respect, then we can get lost in that and then the connection is gone, right? We can always go back to tone later, but in that moment, right, how do we also ground ourselves? Right? Because I'm telling you, if it's my value that's being challenged in that moment, not just with my child, but with anybody, I'm like, my head is all of a sudden swimming, and I seem to have like no reason for anything, right? So in those moments, one of the things that you can do is a 5-sense exercise. And we did this with the kids this afternoon. So I'm gonna run you through it. Has anybody done the 5-sense exercise before? No? It's something that you can do if your boss is getting on your nerves, right? And you're looking at them dead in the face, and they are saying something to you, and you notice. First of all, you want to go inside and check on your body. And we also got your teens to do this, right? Like you want to check what's happening in your body, because your body's always giving you information, right? So my head would be fuzzy. So just lower your eyes or close your eyes, right? And envision a kind of situation that might have felt a bit tense. And you're going to go through your 5 senses. If you choose to keep your eyes open, no problem at all, because your boss may think you're a bit weird if you're closing your eyes in the middle of a confrontation, right? So while you have your eyes open or your eyes closed, what you're going to do is you're just going to start noticing if you can smell anything. You do about 3 breaths of that. And then what you want to do is you want to just look, see what your eyes can see. Because you're really trying to bring yourself back to yourself as opposed to being up here and, okay, so now you smelled, you've looked, now I want you to listen. What do you hear? And now I want you to check in with, what do you taste? Maybe it was your lunch. And the last one, whatever you can touch, right? So it may be you don't want to move, and I just want you to notice what it feels like to have your clothes up against your skin. Or maybe the fact that you're being supported by this chair. Can you imagine trying to sit like this without this chair? And if you're touching your book or your pen, just notice what it feels like. So that's something you can do. You can open your eyes. When you feel like you're up there, you are activated emotionally, and you're really trying to come back. Does that make sense so far? Okay. We're going to do another one, which is a little bit more of a practice. So like the 5 sense one I just gave you is something that you can do in the moment when people are trying your last nerve, right? But the one you want to practice, I think, is like when you're getting ready to go to sleep. Does anybody do anything like a progressive muscle relaxation before you go to sleep, or have you done any of that before? Yeah? No? Okay, so what we're going to do is, this is just a noticing thing, right? What you just want to notice, you know how like if you sprained your ankle, right, you don't really notice how much you appreciated that ankle until you can't use it? Right. So that's kind of the goal with this, is that you want to practice when you're going, perhaps when you go to sleep. We'll do one together briefly, and then what I want you to really notice in this is I want you to notice what a neutral body feels like for yourself, okay? So I know if you're falling asleep, that's okay, that is okay. So what does a neutral body feel like when your body is relaxed, right? Because then I'm gonna give you some activating thoughts, and I want you to notice what happens in your body. Because at the end, I want you to be able to say, when I'm activated, when I'm scared, I feel a drop from my chest down to my stomach, and I'm like, Joanne, I gotta go to the bathroom right now, right? Or when I feel happy, I feel this like lightness that comes, you know, and I feel so free, okay? And then we're gonna tie that into your values, okay? So what I'm gonna have you do is get comfortable in your seats, as comfortable as you can in these seats, and either close your eyes or lower your eyes, whatever feels more comfortable for you. And I trust that you know what is right for your own bodies. If you need to go to the bathroom, you need to have a snack, whatever it is, please take care of yourselves. So just draw your attention to your feet. So with your eyes closed, just notice your feet, your ankles and your toes. And if you notice any tension there, I want you to try and breathe into your feet. Sounds a little weird, I know, but try and breathe into your feet and let the tension go right through the floor, right through to the core of the earth. Now draw your attention to the energy running up and down your legs. And let that energy run down your legs, through your ankles, your feet, and down into the core of the earth. Just let it go. Notice the energy in your pelvic area. Let that energy go right down through your legs, through your feet, all the way down into the core of the earth. Notice your abdomen, your stomach area, your midsection, whatever's happening there, just let it go. Now notice if there's any tension in your chest, any kind of tightness. You might want to breathe into it and try to let it go. All the way down through your abdomen, through your legs, through your feet, to the core of the earth. Draw your attention to your shoulders. We carry a lot of stuff in our shoulders. Breathe into them and let that energy go. All the way down your arms, your fingertips, down into the earth. Notice your throat. Is there energy in your throat? Maybe there are things you do not say, but you need to say. Notice that energy and relax and let it go if you can. Draw your attention to the muscles around your eyes. We don't often think about that. But relax those muscles around your eyes. And let it go. And draw your attention to your mouth. And let your tongue fall away from the roof of your mouth. So notice that relaxation in your body. And now I want you to think of a happy place or a happy time where you experienced joy, peace, or calm feeling as a kid. So as a child, maybe there was a time where you felt proud. Maybe you felt connected to someone. Notice what you feel and where you feel it in your body. Perhaps it's a radiating feel. Maybe it's dull. Maybe you don't feel anything. Just notice. And to bring yourself back to a neutral place, take a breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And as you breathe, notice if the air feels cool or warm as it goes in and out. So now you're back in your neutral state. And as a kid, think back to when you were a kid. I want you to go back and think of a time that something felt negative. Maybe it was a confrontation with a caregiver or a friend. Maybe you felt fear, shame, or embarrassment. Just notice what's happening in your body as you go back. Don't try to change it, just notice. It's information. And get curious about it. Where exactly is it? Is it sharp or dull? Or maybe you feel nothing. We're going to go back to that neutral state. So just notice what's happening in your body. You can choose to use your 5 sense exercise, or you can choose to use any kind of relaxation in order to get yourself back to where you were, in a neutral place. And when you feel like you're back in a neutral place, you can open your eyes. So you have a blank sheet of paper, and you should all have something to write with, I think. If you don't, there are markers here. I encourage you to write down or draw or keep it, just keep in your mind, whatever kind of way you feel you learn best, okay? So to write down those things that made you feel happy, right? And the other thing that was a negative thing. I'm not gonna ask you to share it with anybody, okay? Oh, you look like the kids from this afternoon. You're like, what? So that's just for you to either write it down or draw it or just kind of sit with it if you can remember what it is. And if you're sitting with it, which many of you seem to be doing, take a look at your value sheet. Because, for example, when I think about a happy time for me as a kid, I think about the first day of summer vacation. It always felt so sweet to not have to go to school, so sweet that my sisters and I would get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and go fishing. I didn't know what that was about. But if I think about it, it was, in my body, it gave me this sense of spaciousness, and this kind of felt like almost like a pressure had been released because I didn't have to worry about school. Not that I was really worrying, but, you know, I didn't have to worry about not worrying. But if I try to tie a value to that, so that spaciousness, that freedom, I think as a child, I was valuing my independence. I was valuing freedom to do what I wanted to do, and just quiet time. Like, things were also quite go, 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 right? And just having time and space to, and the fishing was kind of mindful, right? So that's how we're looking at it, right? And then when we look at the negative thing, right? For me, my father accused me of lying, right? He told me I was in town on Court Street, and I was not in town on Court Street. And So with this accusation, I felt shame, right? I was also gaslighting myself, questioning myself. Was I in town? No, I was not in town. But he was so sure that I was because he said, you must have a twin then. But my dog had died that day, which is why I wasn't at home anyway. I was at a friend's house, right? So I was sad, right? And I was also feeling shame because I was being accused of something that I didn't do, right? And then you tie that to the value of, I really valued my relationship with my dad, right? So when that became impacted, right, and it impacted my value, it was a terrible thing I felt, right? So what I want you to consider doing is look at your positive experience and your negative experience and try and see if you can figure out what the feelings are underneath it and also what values you would tie to that, okay? I'm gonna give you a few minutes to do that. You can talk to somebody next to you if you like or not, right? You're welcome to do it on your own. And I'll check back with you in a few minutes, okay? You have your values sheet as well for you to look at. Would anybody like a refresher on what a value is? Sure? Okay, so a value is something that we find important and that we want to use to lead in our lives, right? So for example, one of my core values is family. So I don't really want to do work that's gonna impact my family in a negative way. So because that's one of my core values, I set it up so that I can be present for my family. But not everybody's values are the same, right? And it's about getting clear on what your values are, because once you can walk in the world with your values, then it makes things easier, right? When somebody presents something to me and they say, we would like you to do this thing, I can say, oh, does that align with my need to be with my family, right? That's one thing. Is it truthful? Is it honest? That's also another value. Then it makes things very easy, right? And we had the kids do this afternoon as well. So you get to also talk with, well, probably not you all, but you can talk with your children about, values and figure out, hey, do they even have the same ones as I do? But anyway, I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Does anyone need more time? No? Okay. So what do you know about the things that you value? You don't have to share the situation, but what came up for you in terms of values? Not sure? Or you want to work through it together? Okay. Say again?
I said my mind was pretty blank.
Your mind was pretty blank. You probably needed a snack. I hear you. If you think about even, maybe not necessarily related to this, right? What things are you willing to defend? For me, it might be anything to do with social justice, right? Anything to do with social justice, I would probably get in a fight over. right? What are you willing to like fight for? Do you have a sense?
My kids.
Okay.
Getting back to like when I was a kid.
Right. Okay. So we went to something here because what I'm going to show you is now you're like, as a kid, I don't really know, right? So here are some values that I think my parents were trying to put onto me, right? So here I was, you saw the picture of me as a teenager, right? Academics, right? So this is the value learned from my parents, the Bermudian society at large, or my schools, right? And so academics, listen, I was a 65% student at that time, right? My sister took up the space of the academic, right? And I was like, well, it ain't no room there for me. I just need to pass to make sure my parents don't get on my case. So I was the class clown in as much so that I could, you know, just not be in trouble too much, right? Athletics, you know what? I did the basketball, the volleyball. I only went to ballet because my mama said, you're gonna be tall. I don't want you to be awkward. So I was constantly engaged in these physical things, right? So again, I might have complained, but from that perspective, you know, she gets a 9 because I can tell my friends, right, that she does all these things, these sports, and she's involved and she's active. Faith. So the rule in my house was, you go to church, you go to Sunday school until you're 16, and then when you go 16, you get to make your own decision, right? I went. And the time I turned 16, it was a happy dance because I'm not going anymore. And you know why? A big part of it was because my parents didn't go. Now I realize it was the special time, perhaps. But we all had to go, right? And then I'm like, I couldn't really talk about the hypocrisy I was seeing at the time. You know, there was no room for questions about it. It was just, go, do as I say, not as I do, right? Which was really disconnecting. But again, from that perspective, I look like an 8 out of 10 because I was going, right? Same thing, honesty, 8 out of 10. That's what they would have given me. I think I would give myself something probably lower, but whatever. Compliance with rules. For the most part, I really did comply with the rules, but I really did try to get away with a lot of stuff too, right? But most of it was fear-based, right? And that was the thing, when it's fear-based, it's not as helpful, right? Okay, so that was me as a teen. Now, if you look at, this would be how my parents would have rated me back then, right? I know it's so small on your sheets. I'm sorry, I must have had on my magnifying glasses that were like at plus 80. And then, and then try to print it, and now you see it's like, nobody's gonna read this. Okay, but you can see it up here. So then if I were to rate myself now, right? So I went from this as a teenager, these are my parents' values that I adopted, that I said, okay, this is what I'm expected to do, right? But now, this is what I value, right? Family is up here at number 9. Now, you know what? Probably my parents did value family, but it didn't come out like that. Like they weren't explicit in it, right? And because they weren't explicit, I didn't get that message, you know? I know that now. Relationships, again, like my friendships, my partner, my child, like all of these things are, and this is how I would grade myself. You know, we all have room for improvement, right? Health is also something that's pretty important. Again, health is probably translated right here to athletics, right? But they didn't name it as health. It was like, don't be awkward, be graceful and tall. Okay. Emotional courage. That's something I really value, and I don't think that my parents valued that, even though they were quite courageous in that you had a black man marrying a white woman in the early 1970s, right? So there's some courage there for sure, and there had to be emotional courage, but again, we didn't talk about it, right? And then academics and status, let me tell you, I would not put this on her for myself, but I now tie academics to status, right? Whereas before, academics for me was like something I had to do. Now it's like, I have a master's degree, and you know what? That feels like a status thing. Does it feel good? No. But is it true? Yes. You know? Also, it felt redeeming for me because I went from a 65% average to a master's degree where I was like the 95% student once I found the thing that I was interested in. So I think this kind of goes to show that, you know, our values, what they have for us, right? There can be a lot of fear in what we are going to be as the adults, what we're going to, and our kids, like, what are they going to value? Is it going to be all social media? Like, you know what I mean? So that's also part of it. We're trying to figure out, what do they value, right? And they had some of those questions earlier today in the social media, what was it called, the workshop, where it's like, what is the point of posting, right? How do you feel when you get likes, right? And really trying to break that down. So, what I want you to consider is, I think you have a blank sheet on there. I want you to consider, perhaps you can do this at home if you want, but to consider what it is you value about your own child, right? Because the other sheet actually is, I want you to consider also what your parents were grading you on, right? So consider give me some examples of what you think your parents or your caregivers valued. Are they similar to mine, you think, on this side? For the most part? We all pretty much have these for our kids for the most part, right? Is there anything else you would add on there? Or take away? Contribution, yes, service. I like that. That's a good one, right? That's a value. And there's other things that are not going to be on your value sheet that you, by all means, you know, it's about, again, this is like for you to customize for yourself and for your own family. Okay, so you would add contribution. Anything else? Manners. Interesting.
My interactions with all adults, preachers, grandparents, whoever, watching to see how I behave.
Yes, and manners for them translated to respect, right? Yes, we could do a whole nother evening on that, but we won't. I'll just move on. And then, so once you do yourself, right, which you're welcome to try, I also encourage you to do for your own child. Like, you saw what I was raised with, but this is what I'm rating my own child on, right? Academics is not even in there. I'm like, and people look at me like I've got two heads when I say kindness. It's like, I haven't met a whole lot of kind people in the world, but that's something we really espouse in our family, right? That's something that we really value. Critical thinking, don't believe everything everybody tells you or you see online, right? I want you to know how to think. I don't want to tell you what to think, right? And then the integrity piece and standing up, not only for herself, but for others, right? Now, guess what? This is where we look like this, right? I'm set my child up for this, right? And then I'm like, she's going to love these things too. Right? And I have to be okay with that. That's the hard part, right? Because I'm here to tell you, if my child says she wants to be a professional gamer, I don't know where I'm going with that. That's going to be really hard for me, right? I'm like, that's not a real job. You got to leave the house. But it is a real job, and she doesn't have to leave the house. I don't have to agree with it, right? But I also have to acknowledge there are going to be some things that are really hard for me, right? I'm like, go ahead, tattoo yourself, pierce yourself, but don't become a professional gamer. Come on, talk to people. We talk to people for a living, you know. So I encourage you to think about what do you think you would add to that list or take away from that list for your own child or children? Academics, perhaps? So you want academics on there. What else? Independence, okay. Independence. Anything else?
Physical strength, especially for a girl, when
Okay.
to be able to fight,
Okay.
to be more explicit.
Right. A work ethic. Okay. So being physically able to defend herself, and also work ethic. Okay, so these are things for you to remember specifically, right? Because when your child comes home and says, I was accused of cheating at school or something along those lines, then you know that is the work ethic value. That's why it triggers us so much, right? Like if my child came home and said, you know, I failed a test, I'm not going to lose my mind because academics is not one of my core values, right? My question would be more like, how'd that happen? Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? More questions around it as opposed to, you better do better next time. You know? That's where we are. So think about what is triggering for you and where it triggers you with your values. No. So these things, like when I say if your child was accused of cheating, right? And now you got this work ethic value, right? Just notice what happens in your body, right? And it also depends on where your value falls, right? If work ethic was down here, you might be like, eh. But if work ethic was number one, oh, you might be livid, right? And it's all based on your own experiences. Like Darren's talking about physical toughness for our daughter because even at her young age, she's been bullied physically, right? So that's something that has shown up for us as a value, right? She's in Taekwondo now. No, it's karate. Something. Yeah. She'll kick some people if need be. But then the kindness gets in the way. You know, sometimes values conflict, right? Yeah. So that's the other thing when you have to figure out, oh, these values are in direct conflict with another, right? Because it's hard for her to understand, how can I be kind and yet I have to kick somebody's tail when they're misbehaving with me, right?
So if part of the role of the parent is to explicitly teach values to kids, like if it does come, you know, they fail a test and number one view is work ethic, it's going to make you livid, but like you also still want to get across the point, right, that work ethic matters, you know, so yes, you're angry and it's really important to you, but what do you actually do?
Mm-hmm.
You can notice all the feelings and all that stuff, but it still really is important. Do you have to just acknowledge that maybe that isn't their value and let that go, or is part of the role to actually, you know, say, no, this is important?
I think that's a real great question, Dan. Like, you're like, listen, Joanne, what do we really do here? Because I'm going to stand up here and I'm going to be feeling my fingers. I'm going to be smelling the coffee and tasting the bitter taste of failure in my mouth, right? But I'm going to be real upset with this child. And I want you to know that there are times where you will feel these things because we're human, right? That's what we do. The problem is when we feel them so much that they are on the child. Like, how can you, I gave this analogy to them today. I'm like, you're in a boat, right? You're on a rough sea, but nobody else is driving your boat for you. You're just in your boat, right? I'm like, your parents are there, your caregivers are there. If you have a hole in your boat, they will give you a patch kit. They hope you've been paying attention to patch up your boat. You know what I mean? But your parents are not driving the boat anymore. So sometimes there are consequences that we don't like. And I think I hear you saying, but if I really value work ethic and my child is not valuing work ethic, how can I force them to value work ethic, right? And the answer is you can't, right? I think what you can do is check in with yourself. Am I demonstrating a good work ethic, or am I just saying I'm demonstrating a good work ethic, right? And sometimes it's also about really just checking in with them, and sometimes they just make mistakes, right? I think when it's a pattern, that is a problem. But when you notice the first time, what is the point of this? Like, you sit down, first you gotta calm yourself, right? Because you already know when you're up here and buzz, I'm gonna fight somebody land, nothing's getting done. What you're creating is disconnection. Yeah. And really what you're trying to do is create connection with your children, right? And again, don't get it twisted. Connection is not all this like nice, feel good, loving. No, it can be boundaries too, right? That can be connecting, and kids need boundaries, right? But when you're in the moment, you can also say to them, Dan, listen, I'm feeling really triggered right now. You could go as far as to say, I value work ethic, and you have disappointed me in this area today. I need to go and think about this. and then you go away and you do your research on the internet about what you're going to say now. Maybe, but the most important part is also about just being able to control ourselves in the moment, right? So that the kids know when something really does go haywire, that they can come and talk to you. You know what I mean? That you're not going to go from 0 to 100 and be up here in this place. Dan is not convinced.
So, if I'm understanding correctly, the relationship has to trump the value.
Yes.
Right? Like, we just have to accept we're possibly going to lose that. Like, they're not going to have work ethic, so maybe they're not going to be as safe or comfortable as we would like them in life. But most importantly, like, is that they still feel they have a connection with me. So that's more important than.
And here's the
me
thing.
trying to force this value.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, you could try and force it and see how it works for you, right?
Yeah.
I think that's what we all tend to do. That's what was done to us, right? If we just drill it into them,
Yeah.
they'll sooner or later do it. And guess what? That creates two things. One, the outside, right? The mask that the children are wearing. And then it becomes the inside. Because I was that manipulative, kind of passive-aggressive rebel that was like doing all these kind of shady things. But on the outside, it looked like I was 8, right? So, and I think it also, we have to consider, and I think lots of us think in these terms of all or nothing, right? Like, is it really like the end of our value of work ethic if they got it wrong? You know what I mean? If you make the time, Dan, to sit with them and really say, hey, I really want to understand how this came to be. Like, how did you find yourself cheating? You know? And if you ever cheated in your life when you were a teenager, it would be a good time to share that with them, right? This idea that parents are perfect and that we never did anything wrong and I told you what to do and therefore you should just be doing it. Dan is still not convinced.
No, I am. It's just thinking.
It's hard, right? It's hard when you think, I can't actually let go of my values. And I'm not saying like, leave the values like over there for the relationship. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying you can be clearer to children about this is what we value in this family. And if you don't value work ethic, can we talk about why? You know what I mean? To invite them to that space. And part of the way you can create this is, one, when you're talking to them, right? Many times they don't want to see our faces. Okay? They want us to be walking beside them so we're not looking at them, right? They also want us to maybe be driving, you know, so that's a good time to talk. A good time is when we have dinners or eat meals together, right? If you can make that a practice, because again, parenting has to be a priority, right? We have to say, I have to invest the time with these little people or these young people if we want them to come to us, because they have a lot going on, y'all. They have so much going on, right? What would it be like for you to be, like, think back to the worst thing you did as a teenager or a young person. Think back to that and imagine if somebody had recorded it and it was on TikTok right now, right? Like, our mistakes are not public. You know what I mean? Well, I can't speak for everybody because some of y'all look young, but my mistakes are not public, right? But some people's really are. These young folks, it is, right? We could look at that, but we ain't. So we talked about a little bit about losing the plot, right? And Dan, that was a great question regarding like, yeah, and what do we do? The other thing I want to check in with you about is, are you listening more than you speak? Right? And again, like the number one thing is, it's very difficult to listen when we are activated, right? So today, hopefully you had a sense of what happens in your body when you get activated, right? And then you're able to tie that to figure out, oh, this is actually what is important to me, you know? Because if it wasn't important to you, you wouldn't be activated, right? And sometimes it's just fear. Fear is activating us. And you want to go deeper than the fear. Why am I afraid, right? The other thing, two things for you to consider, connection before correction. So that's specifically, I think, around what Dan was saying, right? It's how can we connect and then correct, right? Because if you try to correct first, then you got your teenager sucking their teeth and walking out the door, and you're like, hey, don't suck your teeth at me, right? So connection before correction. And remember, there always has to be the correction, and you're going to get it wrong. And when you get it wrong, you have to go back and say, hey, I got that wrong. You know? It's humbling. This parenting gig is humbling, right? Because they're always there, and they're always like, but you said, caught. I'm caught, right? The other thing is, do you want your home to be a sanctuary or a war zone? You know? When we set up clear expectations, if they know that you really value work ethic, right, they're going to work the behinds off to try and maintain that because they value you, because you're there, right? But I think so much of it is going, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not specific, it's not discussed, it's just understood, if you will, right? So it's also okay for you to say, I have this value, and for them to have something different, right? I mean, it probably doesn't feel okay, right? Remember my professional gamer child? Doesn't feel okay, but that's what we're here to do, right? They're in their own boats, and it's scary. I think it's also helpful to talk to people when it feels scary, because the other thing is about doing those exercises in your own body, right? You're the only one who feels that. You know, even if you are parenting with a partner, they don't feel necessarily the same things that you feel. They're not activated by the same things, which then guess what? Can activate you too, right? So you have to know what's happening in your own body. Know, oh, this is why I feel the way I feel. Okay, and this is what it is in direct conflict with. That make sense? So does anybody have any questions before we finish up? You have things to take home and work on, or show your kids if you want, and ask them what they think your family values are. There's also a picture, this worksheet that you have there that the kids this afternoon were given. And it might be interesting to ask your kids as well what they think about those things. Like one of the questions on there is, if I got pregnant or I got another teen pregnant, I know. And so some of the kids were like, I know to leave the country, right? That was the answer, right? So stuff like that, and then we tie that into the value, because what do you value? My life, right? It's like, okay, so what you value there is your family. You don't want to disappoint your family, right? So these are the things, and that gives you like some conversation points to talk with them about, right? If they tell you that they got this information from you, even that could be surprising, right? You're like, when did I ever say that? And you may learn you never said it, but they learned it by watching you, right? Thank you for your attention this evening. Really my honor to be here. Have a good evening.